Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a sleepy little village in medieval France, a place with wooden wheels creaking down cobblestone alleys, where every house smells faintly of firewood, cheese, and, most importantly, bread. Not the crusty artisan kind from your favorite bakery, but loaves as hard as roof tiles, and just as likely to give you visions of angels or demons. You're probably not ready for what's lurking in the pantry. You stroll past a candlelit chapel, hear distant bells, and catch the faint scent of something earthy. It clings to the fog and clings even harder to the bread cooling on the baker's rack. One bite of this stuff, and you might start seeing things, not taxes or deadlines, actual dragons, melting trees, or saints stepping out of the stained glass windows. So yeah, you probably wouldn't survive this place, but you'll definitely be glad you visited in spirit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Midnight in Missouri, dawn in Delhi. I love seeing where we all come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a strange truth. In medieval France, bread wasn't just a meal. It was a universe. You couldn't escape it. From the wealthiest noble to the hungriest peasant, bread formed the base of every table, every fast, every feast. You didn't ask what was for dinner. You asked what kind of bread you'd be dunking it in. Rye, barley, oat, spelt, all depending on what grew nearby and what you could afford. And in the poorer villages, rye ruled. Rye was dependable. It grew in soils that other grains scoffed at. It didn't need much attention, just water, patience, and the occasional prayer to Saint Honoré, patron saint of bakers. But like all dependable things, it had its dark side. You step into a 14th century bakery. It's cramped and smoky. The oven's been burning for hours. The baker, sleep-deprived and lightly floured, shovels loaves with mechanical precision. But something's off. Some of the flour sacks smell strange, musky, like damp hay left too long in the sun. You wrinkle your nose. He shrugs. That's just the rye, he mutters. Except it's not just the rye. Lurking in the grain is a little hitchhiker called Claviceps purpurea, better known to us as ergot, a fungus that loves moist rye as much as medieval peasants do. And it doesn't just sit there politely. It replaces the grain like a body snatcher in a horror story, forming black, claw-like growths called ergot bodies. You'd think someone might notice. But here's the thing. Most people didn't. Not when you're hungry, desperate, and used to eating whatever comes out of the oven. Historians still argue whether people in these villages recognized the signs of infected rye. Some suggest they blamed it on bad spirits in the grain, or perhaps thought it a punishment from God for lazy harvesting. Others believe they simply shrugged and kept baking, because really, what else could they do? You wander back into the village square. It's quiet. A few children chase each other around a well. An old woman offers you a crust of bread with a wink. You hesitate. She laughs. Don't worry, it's this year's batch. You nibble anyway. Within hours, the twitching begins, but we'll get there soon enough. For now, just keep walking. The bread ovens are still warm, the fields are full of waving rye, and deep beneath the harvest, something else stirs. You wake before dawn, tucked inside a straw-stuffed mattress in a creaky timber house. Your joints ache slightly, nothing new, and you can already smell it. Fresh bread, thick with the scent of burnt crust and wood smoke. Your host, a wiry farmer named Etienne, is already up, clattering around the hearth with a wooden bowl of porridge. But he offers you something better. Yesterday's bread, sliced thick, served with a drizzle of last year's honey. You chew slowly. The crust cracks like bark. It's dense, sour, and oddly chewy, like someone kneaded it with river stones. This, you quickly learn, is rye bread, the backbone of rural French life. It's everywhere, filling stomachs from sunup to sundown. In most peasant homes, meat is rare, vegetables are seasonal, but bread? Bread is eternal. People judge your worth by the size of your loaf. Families measure wealth by how many mouths they can feed from a single rise. Children are raised on crusts. The elderly crumble stale heels into soup. There's even a saying whispered in villages like this one: better a day without sunshine than a day without bread. You get the sense they mean it. But the more you walk these country roads, the more you notice something unsettling. There's a grimness in the way people look at their loaves. Not fear exactly, more like wariness. One baker in a nearby town won't let you near his rye batch unless you sniff it first. Another refuses to bake during damp months. And there are rumors, muttered in corners, about cursed bread that made entire families sick, twitchy, or worse, vision-struck. The reason, of course, is mold, but not the kind you scrape off old cheese. No, this mold is far cleverer, far darker. It begins innocently, hiding deep in the seed heads of ryegrass after a wet season. It loves humidity, shadows, and forgotten sacks of grain. Once inside, it replaces the rye kernel with its own spiny black fungus pod, called an ergot body. It almost looks like a shriveled finger, curled and coal-colored, sometimes poking out from the rest of the grain like a warning. Most people don't notice. Some just grind it in. Still chewing your slice of breakfast, you ask Etienne if he's ever tasted a bad loaf. He pauses, wipes his hands on his apron, and looks out the window. Aye, he mutters, once. And then silence. The scary part? Rye was the only option for many. Wheat was expensive, reserved for nobles and priests. Oats were too fragile, barley too coarse. But rye was reliable. It grew where nothing else dared to, surviving the poor soils of Burgundy, the chill of Limousin, the misty hills of Auvergne. And when times got tight, families often stored grain longer than they should have, sometimes into the next harvest, allowing ergot more time to bloom invisibly inside their winter supply. Historians still debate just how much people knew. Some accounts describe villagers blaming spoiled flour or witches in the wheat. Others suggest the church occasionally warned against consuming grain that had turned black. But the lines between caution and hunger blurred easily. When your children cry from empty bellies, you bake the loaf anyway. And if it smells a little off, well, that's what salt and stew are for. As you move from village to village, you begin noticing patterns. In some areas, entire communities seem affected. People limp. Fingers curl into claws. A boy's speech slurs. An old woman claims she saw Saint Denis tapping on her windowsill at midnight. In another village, a shepherd swears his sheep sang to him. You laugh. He doesn't. Bread isn't just food anymore. It's folklore. Some women bury spoiled loaves in the fields, hoping to appease whatever spirit cursed the harvest. Others burn it in small bonfires behind their homes, tossing in herbs and muttering prayers. There are even whispered tales of secret recipes, strange combinations of herbs and grains meant to confuse the mold. Whether they work is anyone's guess, but you are starting to get the sense that no one trusts their bread completely. Not here, not anymore. The loaf that feeds you might also betray you. It might slide something sinister into your bloodstream, slowly, gently, until the world tilts and your body begins to dance to rhythms no one else can hear. So as you finish your breakfast, that last stubborn bite catching on your molars, you start to wonder, was it just a little stale or something more? The roads are muddier today. You tug your cloak tighter, boots squelching along the rutted path between two villages. The rain from last week still hasn't rained, and the rye fields stretch on endlessly, green and dripping, bowed under the weight of too much moisture. You glance at the stalks more closely now. Every patch of grain makes you uneasy. Are those just darker heads of rye, or the subtle bulge of something more sinister clinging inside? By the time you reach the next village, a place small enough to barely have a name, the church bell is ringing for noon prayers. But you're not headed for the chapel. You want to find the baker. And sure enough, his hut is near the edge of town. Stone walls, blackened, with soot, a bent iron chimney puffing weakly. Inside, it's warm, fragrant, deceptively inviting. Rows of loaves line the shelves, but look closer. Some have cracks oozing black paste. Others bear small, odd protrusions like curled claws just beneath the crust. He doesn't notice you're staring. Instead, the baker, a round man with flour on his sleeves and smoke in his beard, gestures to a fresh batch cooling beside the oven. "This lot's clean," he insists. "Tested it myself." You raise an eyebrow. "How exactly?" He winks. "Fed some to the hens." Turns out, ergot doesn't affect birds the same way. Chickens might get a little drowsy, but they won't twitch or moan like humans. So rural bakers, especially those without access to wealthy town guilds or fancy mills, resort to testing their flour on fowl. If the hens survive the sample loaf, it goes to market. You glance at the pecking flock outside, suddenly less interested in buying a slice. The baker offers you a smaller loaf to take with you. You accept, mostly out of politeness, though you have no plans to eat it anytime soon. As you walk back toward the village square, he calls after you, almost like a warning. "It's the damp years," he says. "The rot comes worse when the rivers flood." He's not wrong. Historians and agricultural scholars now agree that ergot outbreaks surged during cold, wet seasons, when rye fields stayed damp and fungal spores thrived. In modern terms, they'd call it a foul claviceps bloom. But medieval villagers had no vocabulary for spores or alkaloids. All they knew was that some years the bread tasted strange, and strange things happened to people who ate it. You pause by a public well, eavesdropping as two women gossip in hushed tones. One describes her cousin's sudden fits, jerking limbs, rigid posture, eyes rolled back. "She danced for hours," the woman whispers. "Didn't eat, didn't sleep, just danced." Her friend crosses herself. "Was it the fever again?" "No," the woman replies. "Bread." These aren't rare stories. The deeper into rural France you go, the more you hear them. People call it le feu sacré, the sacred fire, or le feu de Saint-Antoine, the fire of Saint Anthony. It's not a fire you see, but one you feel burning from within. Your skin prickles, your fingers spasm. You might lose control of your legs. Some people scream about devils pulling them down. Others whisper of celestial visions and glowing saints. Of course, modern medicine tells us this is ergotism, a poisoning caused by ingesting the fungus's powerful alkaloids. It comes in two delightful varieties: convulsive, which includes seizures, spasms, and hallucinations, and gangrenous, which causes limbs to blacken and rot. Back then, they just called it cursed. You reach a small farmhouse where a man sits by the window, one hand bandaged in rags. He greets you warmly, then explains, half joking, half sincere, that he's been touched by the rye. He pulls back the cloth just enough for you to see the beginning of rot along his fingertips. "Still better than the dancing," he says with a crooked smile. What's strange is how common this all feels. No one seems shocked, alarmed maybe. But this isn't new. Bread hurts people sometimes. That's just the way it is. Historians still argue whether people made any real connection between the grain and the sickness. Some accounts suggest local healers and monks kept records of bad years and tainted grain. But whether this knowledge ever reached the wider public is unclear. Information traveled slowly, and superstition often replaced science. Was it the weather? Demons? A test from God? For the villagers who lived it, all they could do was hope. Hope the next batch was clean. Hope the baker noticed the signs. Hope the hens didn't lie. You take a seat under a tree outside the village and unwrap the loaf the baker gave you. You tear off a piece. The inside is grayish, slightly moist, and smells faintly of mushrooms. You hesitate, then set it aside. Some mysteries aren't worth chewing on. Night falls quickly in these parts. The sky fades from slate to ink, and you find yourself drawn to the edge of a nearby hamlet, where torchlight flickers against old wooden beams and smoke curls lazily from chimney tops. You pause at the door of a modest home. Inside, a family gathers around their evening meal: coarse soup, pickled cabbage, and, of course, bread. The loaf is darker than usual, with a thick crust and a spongy, damp interior. No one questions it. They're too tired, too hungry. You slip inside quietly, unseen in the dreamlike fog that cloaks the village, and watch. The youngest son takes a bite first. He chews thoughtfully, then reaches for more. His mother follows, as does his older brother. They eat slowly, methodically. By the time the father breaks off a piece for himself, a strange stillness settles over the room. It's not just the end of a long day, it's a hush, a heaviness that presses against the walls. The hearth crackles, the dog growls at nothing. Outside, the wind stirs in slow, uneasy circles. Hours pass. The children toss in their beds. The eldest mutters in his sleep, limbs twitching as if dancing with shadows. His brother mumbles nonsense. At first, the parents think it's a fever, but when the mother begins to hum, soft, off-key, and entirely unaware, it becomes clear something isn't right. You drift from house to house as the village slips into this shared dream. A woman down the lane is found weeping beneath her table, convinced her husband has turned into a goat. A young man screams that the Virgin Mary is weeping blood in the firewood stack. Another digs furiously in the mud behind the church, looking for a golden fish that only he can see. You begin to realize that this isn't illness in the way we think of. It's something else. Something halfway between sleep and madness. The villagers walk, shout, pray, and collapse. Some wander into the hills and aren't found for days. Others fall rigid, eyes wide, breathing shallow. The bread has taken them somewhere far away, and not all of them will come back. It's not an isolated case. In fact, stories like this one ripple through the centuries. One of the most infamous outbreaks occurred in 944 AD in Aquitaine, where chroniclers described a great burning of flesh and madness among the poor. Later, in 1039, the citizens of a town called Xanten saw entire families convulsing in the streets. The pattern was always the same: a bad harvest, damp grain, rye full of rot, and then the dancing, the fire, the visions. Historians still debate whether all of these outbreaks were caused solely by Ergot. Some argue that mass hysteria, religious fervor, or even epilepsy played a role. But what's difficult to ignore is the consistency, the bread, the symptoms, the suffering. You continue your quiet walk through the night village, now eerily silent. The torches have burned low. The streets are empty, save for a young girl sitting cross-legged by the well. She's singing softly to a doll, made of bundled herbs and string. You listen to the words, an old nursery rhyme, something about St. Anthony in a burning house, and feel a chill crawl up your spine. When she finishes, she looks directly at you and smiles. "No more bad bread," she whispers. "They burned it all." Her voice is too calm, too knowing. You turn and glance back at the bakery. The hearth has gone cold. Smoke trails into the night like a fading memory. The baker is nowhere to be seen. In the distance, you hear faint bells again. Not from the church this time, but somewhere deeper, fainter. The kind of sound that doesn't come from metal and rope, but from inside your own ribs. You tell yourself it's just the wind, just another damp village evening, just another story about bread. But now you know better. The morning arrives with fog so thick it feels like you're walking through someone's breath. Dew clings to the hem of your cloak, and the village you passed through last night lies still, eerily undisturbed. You keep moving, following a path lined with hedgerows and mossy stones until you hear something unusual: music. Not the elegant kind you'd expect in a noble court, but a frantic, frenzied rhythm, as if someone was stomping through gravel with bare feet and no sense of time. You crest the hill and see them. A dozen people, maybe more, dancing in the center of a clearing, their limbs flailing in wild, uncoordinated spasms. Some spin until they fall, others laugh or cry, oblivious to the tears running down their cheeks. A few try to stop but can't. They twist, jerk, and collapse, only to rise again moments later. moving to a music no one else can hear. A man in a wool tunic beats a pot with a spoon, eyes vacant, tongue hanging slightly out. You feel like you've walked into a ritual or a fever dream, or maybe both. This isn't the only place it's happened. Across medieval Europe, strange outbreaks like this were recorded in the margins of parish books and monastery ledgers. Dancing plagues, they were called. Choreomania, if you want to sound like the modern scholars. In 1374, the city of Aachen saw hundreds of people dancing in the streets for days. In Strasbourg, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea started dancing and couldn't stop. Within a week, dozens joined her. Some collapsed. A few even died. Historians still argue whether these were cases of mass hysteria, psychological rebellion, or good old-fashioned moldy rye. But here's the eerie part. Many of the affected towns reported the same conditions: a bad rye harvest, damp storage cellars, bread that tasted bitter or off, and a sudden, unexplained wave of bodily chaos. You stand there watching, hypnotized, as the dancers in the clearing move like puppets in a storm. One man's feet bleed through torn shoes. A girl falls, convulses, and then grins up at the sky. A monk stands nearby reading aloud from a prayer book, eyes darting nervously between the twitching bodies and the heavens. Some in the village believe the dancers are touched by the divine, punished or blessed depending on whom you ask. Others suspect possession, the work of demons lurking in the bread or in the soul. A few are pragmatic and blame it on hunger, stress, or grief. After all, life here isn't exactly gentle. A crop failure, a cold winter, the death of a child. These things happen more often than not. And maybe the body just breaks. Still, some odd details won't let go. The consistency across regions, the recurring link to rye, the way the fits start just hours after a shared meal. You approach a tired-looking man at the edge of the field. He's not dancing, just watching. He tells you this began 3 days ago, after a wedding feast where the bread had been stored in a damp cellar. I knew something was wrong, he says. The smell. It wasn't right. He lowers his voice. I didn't eat it. I was fasting. He doesn't look smug about it, just haunted. As the sun rises higher, some dancers begin to slow. They collapse into muddy grass, breathing like bellows, eyes staring into the middle distance. Others begin again. You wonder if they'll ever stop, if their minds are still theirs, if the spores in the rye have truly left, or merely settled in for a long, slow stay. You keep walking. Because if this is what bread can do to a village, you don't want to know what it's done to a city. By the time you reach the outskirts of the next town, the road has widened, and the houses have grown taller, more tightly packed, and far more concerned with appearances. Flower boxes hang from windows. A few candles flicker behind embroidered curtains, and merchants call out prices from behind fruit stands that sag under the weight of not quite fresh apples. But even in a place like this, respectable, well-trimmed, almost smug, you can sense the tension under the cobblestones. It begins at the church, as it often does. You slip into the back of a small stone chapel during evening vespers, where the smell of incense mixes strangely with something metallic, faint but unmistakable. The congregation kneels, murmuring half-remembered Latin, their faces drawn, tired. On the altar, a wooden bowl sits beside the wine chalice, and in it, bread. Thin slices of a dark, chewy loaf that would make a modern bakery shutter its windows in shame. You don't have to wait long before something goes wrong. A woman in the second pew begins to sway, just slightly at first, her fingers twitching like they're plucking invisible strings. The priest continues chanting, but he's watching her now. She stands up, turns around, and begins speaking in a strange, melodic voice, like she's quoting scripture that no one else has heard. Her eyes are wide, but unfocused. Another man lets out a sudden sob, crumpling forward. No one screams, no one panics. They've seen this before. Afterward, you overhear a priest speaking with a young novice near the vestibule. She saw St. Michael, he mutters, said he had wings made of rye stalks. The novice nods solemnly. Better that than the devil. They glance around, lowering their voices even further. It's the bread, the elder adds. Again. You follow them outside, back into the dusk, as townsfolk whisper and cross themselves. But here's where things get interesting. Not everyone sees the same thing. Not everyone reacts the same way. For every convulsing dancer or prophetic whisperer, there's someone who feels a deep calm or claims to see divine light. In the countryside, the reaction might be terror, visions of demons, torment, and fire. But here in town, some see angels, glowing saints, even heaven itself, breaking through the ceiling tiles in a shower of gentle flame. Historians still debate whether these variances came from cultural context, dosage, or simply suggestion. Was it the environment, the preaching, the personal beliefs of the afflicted? Did a deeply religious mind shape the hallucination into a holy vision, while a fearful one shaped it into torment? Or did the fungus decide which mask to wear that day? You walk through the town square, where a small crowd has gathered around a young girl reciting something from memory. Her speech is poetic, otherworldly. They say she's been like that since market day, someone whispers, touched by the host. Another disagrees. She just hit her head. It's not bread, it's a bump. But no one can explain how she knows verses that haven't been spoken aloud in years, or why she refuses to eat anything now except wild herbs and rainwater. This tension between science and superstition, between sickness and sainthood, runs deep through medieval France. A convulsion might mean you're cursed, or it might mean you've been chosen. A hallucination might be dismissed as madness or elevated to miracle. The church, of course, walks a careful line. In some regions, monks burn moldy grain and warn their flock to avoid tainted loaves. In others, the same symptoms are quietly woven into the tapestry of sainthood. They light candles, offer prayers, and if the afflicted happens to say something poetic or convenient, well, perhaps that's the Holy Spirit whispering. And so, the cycle continues. You sit on the edge of a fountain, watching the light fade behind tall townhouses. A bell rings from somewhere high above. It's peaceful here, but under the cobbles, under the pride, under the polished chalices and starched robes, something dark still lingers in the flour sacks. It has no face, no voice, just a hunger for dampness and a willingness to wait. The road from the town to the nearby abbey winds through a forest of tall chestnut trees, their leaves whispering secrets you can't quite catch. As you walk, the air grows cooler, laced with the scent of moss and baking bread. Yes, even out here. The monks of St. Vincent's Abbey are known across the region for their loaves. Pilgrims say the bread has healing properties. Locals say it has something even better, flavor. But given what you've seen, you can't help but feel a twinge of skepticism. Bread has already proven itself to be far more than just crust and crumb. By the time you arrive, evening prayers are underway. The abbey sits atop a low rise, simple but elegant, its stone walls mottled with lichen and time. Smoke drifts from a side chimney, and somewhere within those walls, monks are kneading dough in rhythm with their chants. You picture a line of them bent over a flour-dusted table, working in silence as psalms echo softly around them. You're invited to join supper. The meal is plain: lentil stew, a chunk of cheese, and a thick slice of the famous abbey bread. It's warm, fragrant, and surprisingly soft. One bite, and you feel something unexpected. A subtle tingle at the back of your throat, like the ghost of pepper or nutmeg. The monk beside you, noticing your hesitation, smiles. A sacred recipe, he whispers, passed down since Charlemagne. You nod politely, chewing slower now, but as night deepens, you begin to notice the side effects. A novice monk bursts into a fit of giggles during evening prayer, clutching his candle like it's a kitten. Another sways in place, eyes closed, humming a tune no one else recognizes. When the abbot catches you looking, he simply says, "The body is weak, the spirit wanders. This happens sometimes." You lie awake in a guest cell, listening to soft footsteps in the hallway. Someone outside is reciting a psalm backward. Another voice whispers what sounds like a recipe. For what, you can't quite tell. Something about powdered herbs and crushed rye. You're not sure if you're dreaming or simply drifting in that quiet space where thought and sleep blend. The next morning, you rise early and find one of the elder monks burning something in the herb garden. Moldy flower, he explains, without looking up. Too damp this year, he says it casually, like tossing out spoiled fruit. No panic, no sermon, just smoke rising into the grey morning sky. It turns out monasteries, especially those with baking traditions, were often at the center of both the problem and the response. In many regions, monks blessed the grain, baked it into wafers, and distributed it to the faithful. But when things went wrong, when people convulsed during communion or claimed to see the Virgin winking at them from the rafters, it was these same monks who scrambled for answers. Some experimented with purification methods. Others wrote lengthy letters to bishops and abbots, describing visions during fasts or episodes following the breaking of bread. Historians still debate whether some monasteries knew about Ergot and chose to conceal it, or whether they genuinely believed these events were divine. There's even evidence of processions during outbreaks where monks marched through fields with relics and incense, praying over the crops. Bread wasn't just food here, it was theology, mystery, and obligation. To admit it could be poisoned was to flirt with heresy, and so many didn't. As you prepare to leave the abbey, the abbot offers you a parting gift, a small round loaf wrapped in linen. You hesitate but accept. He blesses it with a whisper and a cross traced in the air. May it nourish your body, he says, and lighten your soul. You thank him. But as you tuck the bread into your satchel, you notice the faintest black fleck near the crust. Just a speck, really. Could be ash from the oven. Could be something else. You don't ask. By midweek, you reach a village that seems perpetually trapped in shadow. The trees grow taller here, closer together, and the sun filters through in streaks, as if afraid to commit. The people are quieter too. They speak in hushed tones and glance over their shoulders, even when discussing the weather. It's not long before you hear why. Last year there was a trial, not a political one, not a land dispute or a question of stolen livestock. No, this was a bread trial. And it didn't end well for the baker. The village square is nothing more than a muddy clearing, but at its center stands a tall wooden post, charred at the base. You sit with a woman weaving baskets who tells you, without looking up, that they burned a man there. Too many fell ill after his bread, she says, her fingers working reeds into a tight spiral. Some danced, others saw ghosts. One man walked into the lake and never came out. You're skeptical, but as she continues, the details grow disturbingly specific. The baker was accused not just of negligence, but of sorcery, of intentionally cursing the rye. Witnesses claimed he mumbled to his flour sacks, carved symbols into his ovens, and added strange powders to his dough. He swore he was innocent, said it was bad grain from the miller. But bad grain doesn't chant in Latin under its breath, apparently. The village wanted someone to blame, so they chose the man with the apron. It's not the only such case. Across France and parts of Germany, there are scattered records of bakers being tried for poisoning or witchcraft. When outbreaks of madness followed a batch of bread, in some towns, the accusations were quiet, social exile, a broken window, a burned house. In others, the consequences were more final. Historians still argue whether these trials were driven by actual knowledge of ergot poisoning or just scapegoating. Was it science, superstition, or a perfect storm of both? It's hard to tell. But what's clear is this. When your child wakes screaming about fire ants in their blood, and your neighbor is dancing naked in the snow, and the priest is speaking in tongues you've never heard before, somebody has to take the fall. You wander into what's left of the old bakery. The door creaks open reluctantly, revealing a collapsed roof and a dusting of ash over everything. The hearth is blackened. The shelves have rotted. But in the corner, beneath a pile of rubble, you see it. A wooden bread stamp carved with the symbol of Saint Honoré. You pick it up. It's smooth from years of use, but you can still see the pattern. Half sun, half loaf. A blessing, maybe, or a curse, depending on what was pressed into it. Outside, children are playing near the riverbank. One of them calls out, pretending to cast a spell on another with a stick. "You've got the baker's plague," he shouts. The other collapses in mock spasms. They laugh. The game moves on. But it lingers, doesn't it? This idea that bread could be evil, that something so basic, so beloved, could betray you from within. It's a fear that doesn't fade, even in jest. As evening falls, the basket weaver offers you a corner of her loaf, still warm from her hearth. You thank her and tear off a piece, examining it closely. No black streaks, no curled claws of mold, just bread. But still, you chew carefully. By the next morning, you're following the river toward the market town of Prive, a modest hub where farmers and merchants converge once a week to trade grain, salt, honey, gossip. You arrive just as carts begin to roll in, their wooden wheels groaning, their drivers half asleep. The market smells of livestock and damp wool, but above all else, it smells like bread. Not just one kind, dozens. Flatbreads, twisted loaves, dark hunks of rye, sweet buns with raisins, and dense rounds studded with seeds. Bread here isn't a food, it's a currency. You observe quietly as transactions unfold. A woman exchanges 3 loaves for a bundle of onions. A boy carries a basket of rolls to the spice vendor. A baker argues with a fishmonger over the price of barley flour. At one end of the square, a man in a fine wool coat slices samples from a glossy rye loaf, offering it to skeptical buyers. "No mold," he promises, tested by hens and monks alike. You chuckle, remembering the joke from the smaller villages. But here it's a marketing strategy. Bread has its own economy, and like any economy, it's prone to shortcuts, schemes, and scandals. You learn that some millers are known for stretching their grain with cheaper fillers, ground corns, stale oats, even sawdust in desperate seasons. Others mix flour from multiple harvests, masking the scent of dampness with pungent herbs or even charred rosemary. It doesn't always work. A miller named Benoit, whose beard is nearly as long as his grain ledger, leans in close and mutters, "If you ever see flour with a purplish tint, run. Don't bake it, don't sell it, don't feed it to your dog. Just burn it." His tone is half warning, half confession. And yet, bad flour still changes hands. You see it? A farmer buys a suspiciously dark sack from a sly-looking man whose cart lacks any signage. The deal is quick, whispered, and over before you can blink. The farmer licks his finger, dabs it into the flour, tastes it, shrugs. Hunger doesn't have time for suspicion. Historians still argue whether merchants and millers knew the risks of ergot and chose profit over people, or if they simply didn't believe the stories. Maybe they thought mold was just a minor inconvenience. Maybe they assumed the baking process burned it away. Or maybe, like many, they saw the connection but couldn't afford to care. After all, if you toss out half your harvest, how do you feed your family? How do you keep your shop? In the bustling edge of the market, you stumble upon something strange. A man selling cleansing tinctures, bottled elixirs of sage, vinegar, and ground herbs, meant to purify the belly after a bad loaf. He speaks with flare arms waving as he assures the crowd his potion will dispel demons, toxins, and visions of goats that should not speak. You can't help but smile. Is it medicine? Is it theatre? Probably both, but desperate people will try anything. That afternoon, you speak with a woman named Alice, a baker's widow, who now sells her own bread under a cloth-covered stall. She tells you plainly that she never uses last year's grain. "Too risky," she says. "If I can't smell the season in the flour, I don't trust it." You ask if she's ever had a customer fall ill. She nods. "Once, but it wasn't the bread, it was the lies around it." She tears off a corner of her honey wheat loaf and hands it to you. It's warm, soft, and smells like the opposite of evil. You eat it. It's good. But as you chew, you think about the unmarked sacks, the whispered exchanges, the rumors that trail behind carts like dust. In a world where bread is everything, money, sustenance, faith, the temptation to bend the rules is always rising with the dough. Later that evening, as dusk settles like a shawl over the rooftops, you find yourself in a candlelit room above a tavern, seated across from a man who calls himself Mathieu the physician, though he admits he's more of an educated guesser than a healer. He's spent years studying odd fevers, strange fits, and what he calls rural afflictions that make the soul go sideways. You sip from a chipped mug of watered-down wine as he unrolls a parchment covered in shaky ink drawings, twisted hands, blackened fingers, eyes too wide to be natural. This, he says, pointing to one sketch, was from a boy in Mo who tried to peel the skin off his own legs, said the bread was biting him from the inside. You flinch. He nods, not without sympathy. I don't think it was madness, he continues, or demons. It was something in the bread, something small, smaller than dust. You're surprised. This is the most scientific anyone's been about it. He describes symptoms with astonishing clarity. The crawling sensation under the skin, the spasms, the visions, some terrifying, some blissful. It's almost like poison, he says, but not one you can smell or taste. It hides. Mathieu's tools are crude. A few hand-lathed instruments, a book of humors, a mortar and pestle stained dark with crushed herbs. But his mind is sharp. He believes the bread, especially rye, becomes corrupted in wet years, harboring a parasite that worms its way into the grain. You recognize his description now. Ergot, though he doesn't call it that. It curls the grain like a black tooth, he says, and when people eat it, the world changes shape. He's tried experiments, fed pieces of infected bread to rats, chickens, once a goat. The animals stumbled, seized, or went limp entirely. He's even kept a sample of mold in a sealed jar, but he won't open it again. Not after what happened to my apprentice, he mutters. You don't ask. Still, not all are convinced. When Mathieu presented his findings to the local abbey, the monks listened politely, then recommended prayer and fasting. One even suggested he burn his notes, for the sake of the faithful. Historians still argue whether men like Mathieu were outliers or whether more people quietly suspected the truth and were simply afraid to admit it. You ask if anything can be done, any cure, any prevention. He shrugs. Don't eat it, he says. Or if you must, boil it first, bake it long, burn the black bits. But if you feel the fire crawling in your chest, pray. Before you leave, he hands you a tiny pouch of dried rosemary, sage, and thistle root. Steep it in hot water, he says. It won't stop the visions, but it might soften the edges. You tuck it into your pack, unsure whether you'll use it or simply hold it close when the shadows grow long. As you step out into the night, the stars hang low and heavy, watching. You realize that even now, with the fires banked and the doors bolted, people are still living with this risk. Every loaf is a question, every bite a wager, and somewhere in a cellar, a sack of grain sweats in the dark, dreaming spores into being. By the time you wander into the village of Coudray, the sky is low and grey, and the wind smells faintly of iron and time. It's quieter here than in the places you've passed. Too quiet, in fact. No children playing, no women gossiping over washing basins, not even the caw of a bird overhead. You pass shuttered homes and lowered heads until you reach the center square where a handful of townsfolk have gathered. They're not chatting, they're staring at a wooden post surrounded by discarded shoes. At first, it makes no sense, then you hear it. Behind the old chapel, in a clearing barely visible through the fog, someone is screaming, not in terror but in what sounds like exultation. You follow the sound, stepping carefully between stones and roots until you find the source. A woman, barefoot, arms raised to the sky, her eyes wide with rapture. Her mouth moves quickly, but the words make no sense. Beside her, another kneels in the mud, whispering feverishly into her own sleeve. And just behind them, an older woman is being gently restrained by a priest and two other villagers as she laughs uncontrollably, fingers curling into strange shapes. You're not shocked anymore. You know what this is. It doesn't take long before you hear the accusations. Witch, someone mutters. She called the devil to bless her bread. Another claims she saw the woman boiling herbs under the new moon. One insists her sourdough starter has been bubbling for too long. No yeast should live that long on its own. The words tumble out not as facts, but as fear-stitched speculation. The real root, of course, lies in her oven. She's a midwife and part-time baker, known for her soft hands and sharp tongue. A few nights ago, she distributed loaves to 3 families after a local funeral. Within hours, people began to tremble, shout, and, most damning of all, see things. A man reported his deceased sister standing in the doorway. A girl claimed the Virgin wept in her soup. By morning, the whispers had started. This was no accident. The bread had been cursed, or worse, intentionally witched. You're reminded that women bore the brunt of suspicion in times of illness, confusion, and especially hallucination. A man who bakes moldy bread is careless. A woman who does the same might be burned. Historians still argue whether bread-induced visions directly fueled Europe's witch hunts, but the overlap is hard to ignore. In regions where ergot was common, accusations surged. Places like Limousin, Alsace, and parts of Germany, all rye-heavy territories, saw women dragged before inquisitions for summoning spirits or inflicting nightmares through food. Was it coincidence, correlation, or just centuries of blaming women for things they couldn't control? You step back as the villagers carry the witch toward the chapel steps, not to punish her, yet, but to pray the madness out. She doesn't resist. She keeps smiling, humming, tune that seems both ancient and unfamiliar. The priest sprinkles her with holy water. Her skin sizzles, not literally, but something in the air shivers. Later you visit her cottage, tucked at the edge of the woods. Inside, the hearth is still warm. Loaves sit cooling on a plank of cedar. You examine one carefully, round, domed, rustic. The scent is earthy, pleasant even, but when you cut it open, the crumb is streaked faintly with grey. Deeper inside, the telltale black tendrils of ergot, thin as hair, twisting through the sponge like veins. You place the slice down gently and step outside. The truth is cruel in its simplicity. She wasn't a witch. She was a woman who didn't know her flower had turned. Or maybe she did and was too hungry to care. In the foggy silence, you think of all the other women lost to suspicion, their hands tied not by ropes, but by rye. You arrive in the hilltop town of Saint-Floret just as bells ring. Not the melodious kind, but sharp, clanging notes that echo through narrow stone streets like alarm. Villagers are gathered in the square again. But this time, no one's dancing. No one's hallucinating. They're coughing, shaking, some cradling stiffened limbs wrapped in cloth. The bread this week, you're told, has done something different. It didn't send minds spinning into visions. It attacked the body directly and fast. A physician is already on site, his sleeves rolled, his face grim. He calls it the dry rot. Though you know now, the proper name is gangrenous ergotism. He peels away the cloth from a woman's foot to reveal flesh turned charcoal black, the toes already curled into a frozen goodbye. She whimpers, and the smell forces you to step back, nausea tightening in your throat. It's not just her. 4 others show similar signs: numb fingers, purple lips, aching limbs that refuse to bend or stop trembling. The bread came from the West Quarter, they say, a batch delivered by a merchant who left before sunrise and hasn't been seen since. People point toward the old bakery near the aqueduct, a place recently reopened by a young couple trying to make a life from hand-me-down equipment and a cracked oven. You find them both inside, frantic and sleep-deprived, scrubbing surfaces and tossing loaves into the fire. We didn't know, the wife says near tears. The flower came from my cousin in Limoges. It looked fine. You see the sack in the corner. It's unmarked, slumped against the wall like it's trying to disappear. You tear it open, and the scent hits you immediately. Damp earth, sweet rot, and something faintly metallic. Beneath the top layer of flour, the color shifts. Pale grey, threaded with filaments of black and violet. It's the perfect storm. Wet harvest, warm winter, poor storage, rushed baking. And desperation. Always desperation. By midday, the mayor orders the entire block quarantined. Loaves are piled in the square and set aflame, the smoke rising into the cloud-thick sky as children watch, confused and hungry. The afflicted are moved into the old chapel, which has quickly become a hospice. A priest walks between the rows, muttering last rites over limbs that may still be alive. No one wants to be the first to say the word, but you hear it anyway. Plague. Historians still debate whether outbreaks like this were truly mistaken for plague or whether people simply used the word to describe anything they didn't understand. To them, it didn't matter if the cause was fleas or flour. The result was the same: death, decay, and the smell of endings. You visit the chapel that night. The candles burn low, and one of the men is moaning softly, clutching his chest. Another murmurs about wolves in the rafters, though there are none. He hasn't eaten in 2 days, but the visions still come. You leave before the dreams begin to rub off on you. Back outside, the bakery is empty now, its hearth gone cold. A single loaf remains, forgotten on the windowsill, already growing brittle. You pick it up, turn it over in your hands. It weighs less than it should. You think about how something so small of one bad stalk of rye can bring a whole village to its knees. You set it back down gently and walk away, past the smoldering bread pile, past the empty carts, past the faces that no longer trust their food. Tomorrow, someone will come with clean flour and hopeful words. But tonight, Saint-Fleuret sleeps with its stomach growling and its heart afraid. You leave the scarred town behind, trailing the smoke as it rises into a pale morning sky. The wind has changed, cooler, sharper, and carrying the scent of distant rain. Your path leads you east toward the domain of a local baron, a man with wealth enough to never worry about damp cellars or bad harvests. His estate sits above the river like a crown, wrapped in walls of pale stone and arrogance. You half expect the servants to stop you at the gate, but instead, they wave you through with the same weary boredom you've seen in every tired village, only here, it wears finer boots. Inside the hall, a banquet is underway. Long tables groan under roasts, preserved fruit, salted fish, and, of course, bread, wheat bread, clean, white, fluffy enough to pass as pride. The nobility sit in embroidered chairs, picking at their food, chatting lightly over wine. You sit quietly near the back, listening. The conversation turns, as it always does, to the troubles in the countryside. They say people are seeing visions again, a young lord scoffs, slicing into a roast. Some sort of peasant dance fever? How quaint. Another laughs. Perhaps they've been reading too much scripture. A third snorts, or eating too much of that brown bread. That gets a few chuckles, but not from the steward seated quietly near the wine casks. You catch his eye, and he leans closer. There was an incident, he says in a low voice. 2 servants last month took ill after eating from a discarded loaf. One couldn't walk for days, the other. He hasn't spoken since. You ask if they told the baron. He shakes his head. What would be the point? He doesn't eat rye. That's the thing about rot. It rises from the bottom. The poor eat what's cheapest. The cheap grain is the most neglected. And when people suffer, it rarely reaches the ears of those who can do something about it. Bread becomes a dividing line. Who eats the fresh wheat and who eats the black-laced rye. Later that day, you walk through the kitchens. They're clean, efficient, brimming with good flour and well-stored ingredients. But in the far corner, near the refuse bin, you spot something familiar. A loaf, half-eaten, grey at the crust and splitting slightly at the side. It's been tossed aside like a forgotten mistake. You pick it up. The texture is wrong. It crumbles oddly in your hands. No one notices, or perhaps no one wants to. Historians often point to such moments, small, buried accounts of symptoms ignored, loaves discarded, servants silenced, as signs that even the elite knew something was amiss, but they rarely acknowledged it. To do so would mean admitting that the food they shipped to their people, taxed from farms and stored in their name, was hurting them. And so, it remained an unspeakable truth. You walk the estate grounds as twilight settles. A servant passes by with a basket of fresh rolls, white and fluffy as clouds. You decline, politely. Your hands still smell faintly of that other loaf, the one no one wanted to admit ever existed. As you exit through the stone archway, the steward catches up to you and slips something into your palm, a small, linen-wrapped bundle. Inside, a pinch of flour. "This is from the batch," he says, the one that silenced the boy. You thank him, tuck it into your bag. Another piece of the puzzle. Back on the road, the air grows colder. A storm is coming, and you quicken your pace. Behind you, the lights of the estate flicker on, one by one, like candles in a cathedral built on silence. The poor may have danced and cried and burned, but here, among the rich, the bread whispered more quietly, and no one wanted to hear it. The rain catches up with you just outside a town that seems older than the road itself. The stones here are moss-covered and worn to softness, the buildings slumped together like tired shoulders in a crowd. It's the kind of place where memories outnumber people, and most of those memories are whispered. You duck under the eaves of a crumbling tavern, grateful for shelter, and listen to the rhythm of droplets drumming on the thatched roof. Inside, a fire sputters, and an old man is telling a story to no one in particular. He speaks of a year when no bread rose. Not just a bad harvest, but a cursed one. He says, "The grain came in soaked and stubborn. Bakers tried to dry it with fire, but that only seemed to wake something inside. When the loaves hit the tables, they looked normal enough, but strange things began to happen. People dreaming in unison, dogs howling all night. A newborn said to open its eyes and whisper something in Latin. The villagers, he says, took it as a sign. They buried the grain," he explains, his voice rough as bark, "right at the edge of the forest, dug a pit, burned the rest, and marked the spot with salt. You ask if he believes it really helped. He shrugs. No one got sick after, or maybe we just forgot how." You leave the tavern before the fire dies. The streets are slick now, puddles reflecting the orange glow of lanterns. You follow the path toward the woods, guided by curiosity and something else, a need to understand what this story really means. You don't expect to find a pit, but you do, overgrown, forgotten, half swallowed by ferns and time. The salt has long washed away, but the earth is still dark, still oddly soft. You crouch, brushing away dead leaves, and find a scrap of something buried shallow, a bit of cloth, burlap maybe, still clinging to a crust of petrified dough. It crumbles at your touch, but beneath it, nestled like a fossil, is a single curled sliver of blackened grain. You freeze. It's unmistakable. All this time, you've followed stories, testimonies, rumors, but now here's the proof. Not in a dusty manuscript or the mouth of a wandering priest, but in the soil, in the place where nightmares were fed and buried. Historians today speak of Ergot in academic tones as a footnote to mass hysteria, a hypothesis for dancing plagues, maybe a clue in the Salem trials. But for these people, peasants, bakers, mothers, midwives, monks, it wasn't theory, it was memory. It was the tremble in your limbs after a slice of bread, the shadow in your vision, the ache in your fingers that never quite went away. You stand slowly, rain sliding down your collar. The forest watches you, not menacing, just old, patient, like the mold itself, always waiting for the right conditions. A wet year, a hungry belly, a village too tired to look closely. You walk back to the road with the sliver of grain in your pocket and mud on your boots. The town is behind you now. So is the pit. But in your mind, You can still see it, loaves stacked high, ovens glowing, and somewhere in the center of it all, the slow, invisible crawl of something ancient and eager, something that doesn't need to scream or dance or plead. Just wait. By the time you reach the final village on your winding path, the sun is struggling to break through clouds thick as wool. The air smells of turned soil and chimney smoke, and something else, something faintly sour, familiar by now. The baker here is an old woman with wrists like broomsticks and a permanent squint. She's not surprised when you ask about cursed bread. You're not the first, she mutters, kneading dough with a rhythm that could hypnotize if you watched too long. And you won't be the last. She motions toward the hearth where 2 loaves are baking. That one's clean, she says, nodding to the right. That one's not. You peer inside. Both look identical. You ask how she can tell. She shrugs. I just know. You believe her. There's a wisdom in her hands that no book can match. As the loaves finish, she slices them open. The clean one steams and rises, a soft cloud of warmth and comfort. The other curls back at the crust. The crumb is damp, grey at the center, with tiny black threads like the memory of roots. You see, she says softly. It hides, but not forever. You sit with her a while, sipping warm broth, watching as she crumbles the tainted loaf into a wooden bowl. She doesn't throw it out. No, she feeds it to her pigs. They don't mind, she says with a wink. Maybe they hallucinate too, but pigs never tell secrets. As the evening settles in, you walk through the village one last time. Lanterns flicker in windows. Somewhere someone is singing, soft and low, like a lullaby handed down through generations. And you think, maybe this is how people survived it all, not by defeating the rot, but by learning to live alongside it. To fear it, yes, but not to let it rule their lives. To test the flour, watch the rains, whisper old prayers while kneading dough. Historians still argue whether Ergot shaped the course of revolts, miracles, or madness. But you've seen the traces now, in laughter too sharp, in bread too dark, in eyes that remember too much. You pass one final bakery, closed, shuttered tight for the night. On the door, scratched faintly into the wood, is a mark, half sun, half loaf, just like the stamp you saw buried in ash, a symbol of blessing, or warning, or maybe both. You walk on. Above you, stars blink into being. The road softens beneath your steps, and though the world is still full of questions about bread, about bodies, about belief, you carry something heavier than answers. You carry the silence of every village that learned, too late, what was rising in their ovens. And now your feet are tired. The road behind you has disappeared into memory, and the smell of warm bread, safe bread, clean bread, lingers in the corners of your mind like a childhood song. The sky above you has gone velvet dark, and the stars have settled into their quiet watch. There are no bells here, no shouting, just the hush of wind across fields and the occasional creak of a shutter in the breeze. You picture the ovens cooling, the fires burned low, villagers tucked under patchwork blankets, dogs sighing in their sleep. The night presses gently on rooftops, coaxing out dreams that smell faintly of rye and thyme. And you, traveler, are done for now. Let the images fade, the dancing feet, the twitching hands, the half-melted saints in stained glass windows. Let them dissolve like smoke from a hearth that's been fed for the last time today. No more talk of spores or curses or questions without answers. Just quiet. Your breath slows. Your shoulders loosen. The only thing left is the soft hum of sleep tugging at the edges of your thoughts, like flower dust swirling in morning light. You've wandered through a strange chapter of history, one laced with fear and hunger and fragile hope. And you made it through. All of it. And now, at last, you rest.